Hello again. This is the fifth video on research topics that I find interesting. Um, and today's going to be covering two scientific topics because I just heard an interesting Huberman Lab podcast about sleep and nicotine. And so I wanted to share some interesting facts I learned, and will not be covering anything about history or the US East Coast states. Quick notes, I have to maintain a no liability. I don't want to be sued at all because these are scientific topics, but I'm not recommending anyone to do anything. These are just interesting things that I learned. So if we'll get right into it, I also have some notes here for scientific words that are too complex for me to remember. But starting off, we're going to be looking at sleep and understanding how sleep works, how to better your sleep, and how the circadian clock and rhythm works within our bodies. So jumping right into it, we want to first remember 2 videos ago how I talked about the human body operates at a temperature of around 36.7 degrees Celsius, which is the optimal temperature for us to be surviving. And when we go to sleep, our body on average decreases the temperature by around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an important note. And our body cools down because it wants to go into a restful state where it allows, by decreasing the temperature of our body, less energy is going to be used, and it allows for more of a recuperative state within our body. So then as our body temperature decreases, that temperature decrease peaks at around 2 hours before waking up. And that's also important because having a consistent consistent circadian clock leads to a better planning of that 2 hour peak. So what's important is that the process of waking up is therefore based on the increasing of the body temperature of our bodies. So as our bodies increase in temperature, the hormone called cortisol increases through our brain, and that is really the main stimulation that wakes us up. Now, it's also cortisol is also associated with the stress hormone. It's the same thing. So cortisol regulates stress, sleep, and a few other things. It's kind of like that feeling of adrenaline where you are more of in a heightened state. You're a little bit alert, and having that throughout your body is important for you to wake up. But noting that you don't want this to be chronically high, you only want it to peak in the morning and then to decrease throughout the day. And so that's the first step that kind of regulates your circadian clock. And your circadian clock is located in your hypothalamus, and it's what regulates your production of cortisol, which wakes you up, and regulates your production of melatonin, which puts you to sleep. And that's kind of your entire sleep cycle, which is controlled by the circadian rhythm. And so, let's see, you don't want your... So, how do we achieve an increase in cortisol, and how do we really wake up properly? Well, first thing that it has to do with is the increase of temperature, but also it has to do with naturally waking up. You look at light. And when you look at light, light triggers our circadian clock, known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is located in our hypothalamus, and that then signals the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, which triggers cortisol secretion. Now, it sounds kind of complex, and it's, again, scientific words for it. I didn't want to be unscientific in these videos. And then after the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal triggers this cortisol secretion, it gets released into your bloodstream and wakes up your entire body. But more simply put, the light triggers your hypothalamus to talk to the pituitary glands, which are located within the hypothalamus or below the hypothalamus, one of the two, which then signals to the endocrine system, which is the network of glands throughout your body, to start secreting cortisol. And that is the main function of how you can wake up and peak your cortisol levels very effectively. instead of just waking up normally and your body like slowly trying to produce cortisol, you can help it and assist it in peaking that cortisol as soon and as fast as possible by looking at light. Now, you may be wondering a few things. What if I wake up too early before the sun rises? What if I live in an area where there's no sun? Or what if it's a cloudy day? So firstly, it's very important to get that natural sunlight. The effect itself can even be completely stopped, and you won't receive as much natural light if you're looking at the sun through a window or through glasses. So you really have to be outside looking at the sun, and this is due to the amount of lux. So lux is the measurement of light, and the sun produces anywhere from 50 to 90,000 lux. And you need somewhere above 50,000 lux to really get this strong cortisol effect. And the light refraction that happens through a lens distills the amount of lux that you get. What's also important to note is that normal lights, like an indoor light, only produces around 1,000 to 5,000 lux. So that also cannot replicate the amount of cortisol production that is going to happen from the amount of lux that you're receiving. Now, if it's a cloudy day, or if it's even if it's a cloudy day, the sun will still technically be able to produce lux through the sun. It's just you don't necessarily see it as much, but you also have to spend a little bit more time outside. So normally, if you're outside for 5 to 10 minutes, you'll receive the strong cortisol peak that happens from looking at light. And if it's cloudy day, you need like around 20 minutes of just being outside and enjoying the sunlight. Now, if you have no sun, you could buy these like TikTok ring lights, or just any type of specific light that is made for production of high lux. And those will be your solutions. Other things, kind of recapping a little bit what I said, our body wakes up because our body's core temperature increases, and therefore we produce cortisol. And by peaking your cortisol and being consistent with your waking up time, your body is more naturally inclined to set a consistent circadian rhythm. And having your cortisol being peaked allows the body to naturally have a good degression of cortisol and a natural good progression of melatonin production throughout the day. Other things that you can do to wake up your body properly, and by other ways to increase your body temperature, which therefore increases your body's waking up, is through exercise, because exercise also increases your body's core temperature, gets your heart rate going, increases the amount of blood flow throughout your body. And you can also take a cold shower, which can seem counterintuitive. You might think, if I'm taking a cold shower for 1 to 3 minutes, won't that decrease my body's core temperature? But in response to a cold shock, your body tries to send out and increase the body's core temperature so that it can counteract that cold feeling, and you might start to shiver. And that is your body trying to naturally counteract the cold temperature, which will then shock your body and increase the core temperature. Now, if you stay in the shower for longer than 3 minutes, your body will technically get cold because the cold effect will overwhelm the increase in body temperature. But those are 2 additional ways to wake up your body and set that cortisol level to really increase. Actually, I don't know if exercise and cold showers increase cortisol, but they do wake you up more. And by having a stronger wake up and being more intentional with that, your body naturally figures out the proper time and the proper cycle of melatonin release, which helps you sleep better. Also, some things that can help, which I'm trying now, is like 2 hours before going to bed, not to have any bright lights, so that, like we just talked about, you don't have a lot of cortisol production through your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which I just read off because I don't remember that. But that's an interesting topic for sleep that I learned on the Huberman podcast, which everyone should definitely check out. I'm kind of just stealing facts that I learned from him, so make sure you check out that podcast. Now, again, going to this next topic for nicotine, and not just nicotine, but focus in general, understanding the science behind focus. Um, I'm not a physician. I don't make any recommendations. So anything that I say is kind of just should be taken with a grain of salt and should not be followed. It's not medical advice. I know it's kind of corny to make those liability statements, but I just don't want to get sued. So anyways, so before I get into nicotine, I want to explain the main neurotransmitters and hormones that revolve around focus. So Dr. Huberman talks about focus as somewhat of an arrow. So like imagine like an arrow that you shoot with a bow. You will have the head of the arrow, which is the neurotransmitter of acetylcholine. And this is an important neurotransmitter throughout your entire body. Like all of your muscle glands or muscle fibers and many areas in your brain have acetylcholine, specifically located within your hypothalamus. But it's an important neurotransmitter that mainly focuses on muscle contraction, learning, memory, and attention. So acetylcholine is the main neurotransmitter for muscle contraction, focus, memory, and attention. So if you can find a way to stimulate that, you can increase, therefore, your focus, attention, muscle stimulation. That's the head of the arrow. The body of the arrow is adrenaline or epinephrine. And this is also known as like the fight or flight hormone, which is mostly focusing on, or the effects mostly of this neurotransmitter are increasing heart rate, increasing your blood pressure, and also increasing the amount of oxygen to all of your cells so that they are in this heightened state of fight or flight, so that they can be ready to produce and exert a large amount of energy as quickly as possible. So you're very alert, and that's the key word for what adrenaline does to your body. It makes you more alert. So that's the shaft. The head was acetylcholine, and now the base, the feathers, or the propeller of the arrow that we're talking about here for focus is dopamine. So dopamine is also the probably most commonly talked about neurotransmitter and hormone in our body. It's known as the feel-good hormone because it triggers our motivation, our reward, and our it just basically affects the amount of pleasure that we have, and can allow us to remember certain actions or movements, and then stimulates more pleasure from those actions. And so the combination of those three things are the combination of or the main three neurotransmitters for focus. So again, to recap, we have acetylcholine, we have adrenaline, and then we have dopamine. Now, going into ways that we can boost these three things. So again, these are just like things that I've learned. So you can technically increase your these three neurotransmitters by taking alpha GCP. This isn't like a prescription. This is like a natural supplement that you can take. But what are prescriptions that do increase some of these neurotransmitters are things like Adderall or Ritalin or modafinil or Vyvanse. Things that you need to talk to your physician about if you need them, because there might be people who have ADHD who have a hard time focusing, and so by taking this drug, it allows you to increase the dopamine, and you feel more of a sense of reward and attention to whatever you're working on. And therefore, it causes a chain reaction of motivation to continue to work on that specific thing. Because people with ADHD tend to have, I don't know if it's low or high, but they very quickly lose the rewarding feeling that they get from doing a specific activity. And so I think that technically means they have low dopamine receptors. And it also probably increases the amount of acetylcholine, which specifically is your neurotransmitter for focus in the brain. So those are interesting ways to increase the three neurotransmitters. Other ways to increase your focus are meditation. This is a very common practice. One of the most famous practices is just a 13 minute meditation every night, where you, or actually, sorry, I take that back. It should be a 13-minute meditation in the morning, because by focusing specifically on an area like in between your two eyes, right below your forehead, you're going to train your brain to constantly be refocusing onto this area. So as you meditate, your mind might wander, as it should. You're a curious person. And the meditation comes from refocusing that attention right to that spot and thinking about nothing else. And so just a 13-minute meditation focus on a spot like that has been proven to increase and heighten the focus throughout an entire day. So that's why it's a very important practice, especially nowadays when we have a lot of short form content that fries people's brains and decreases attention spans throughout, everybody's day. So a lot of people have very short attention spans nowadays, and I think meditation could be very helpful. So those are kind of like the basic things. And now to get into nicotine. Now, a quick spoiler. Nicotine is an incredible chemical compound that has the natural ability to increase all three of these neurotransmitters. So that's just out of the gate. It's a pretty incredible thing. Now going specifically deeper into what is nicotine. So nicotine is found in tobacco plants, but also not only in tobacco, but in potatoes and tomatoes, and I think a few other fruits or vegetables, because it's a chemical compound that actually sterilizes insects, and that's why it's like a naturally found thing in these plants and vegetables and fruits, but it has no sterilizing effects on humans. Now, tobacco is itself a carcinogenic and will cause cancer, especially when you have cigarettes who have tobacco papers and a lot of other factors in them who are highly carcinogenic and cause cancers. It's widely proven that smoking will lead to all kinds of bad effects on the body. Let's just put it like that. And then there's also nowadays vapes and other things, and there's all kinds of really strong and disgusting chemicals in them. And one thing, actually I'm not going to say that, but there's a lot of things that can happen to you that are pretty negative in just pure form of smoking and these other chemicals. But putting all of that negative stuff aside, if you can just take out nicotine itself, the chemical compound, and put aside the tobacco or the other carcinogenic factors, nicotine itself, the chemical compound, is pretty miraculous, because it works very quickly, can enter into your bloodstream, and has the ability to increase these neurotransmitters. Now, diving deep into how nicotine actually works. So by putting, let's say, a bit of tobacco into your mucus lining. So we have multiple mucus linings in our bodies. But by putting a little bit of dip or any form of tobacco, the nicotine part of that tobacco then enters through your mucus lining and goes into your blood. And once it enters your blood, it can enter into the entire bloodstream and will instantly flow to your brain, because nicotine can also pass through the blood-brain barrier. And once it does that, it goes into your acetylcholine receptors, and it kind of mimics the acetylcholine receptors by taking place and kind of replacing the acetylcholine receptors, and then going into the hypothalamus and entering into the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. So that's the specific type of receptor that it fills. And once it does that, just quickly before I get into that, these nicotinic acetylcholine receptors aren't just found in the brain and in the hypothalamus, but throughout the whole body. You also have them throughout your muscle fibers and other parts of the body. So that means the effect of nicotine isn't just on the brain for focus, it's also on the rest of your body that gets stimulated from this nicotine effect. And then, as we talked about, heightens the amount of acetylcholine, so it heightens your focus, but through the contact of cells, because once the acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, so it affects and talks to all of the other cells, it also has the effect of transmitting and telling the cells to go into a scientific process that I'm not completely familiar with, and it's pretty complex, but it basically tells them to be more stimulated, or to stimulate more easily. And through this, the release of, through your cells, or when your cells throughout your entire body become more easily stimulated, and once they have the ability to fire more easily, they will then also therefore increase the amount of dopamine, the amount of serotonin, the amount of epinephrine throughout your entire body. So, recapping, the nicotine enters into your nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which then neurotransmit throughout your entire body's cells, telling them to fire more easily and to be more responsive, which therefore then increases the amount of dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline in your body, which therefore has an increase in all of those specific neurotransmitters that we talked about earlier for focus. I mean, that's pretty miraculous for one chemical compound to have that effect. And there's no, actually, I don't want to say there's no side effects because I don't know that specifically, but I didn't hear him, Dr. Huberman, talk about any specific bad side effects from this nicotine's effect on our body. Other than technically it is increasing the amount of dopamine, which is psychologically addictive for us, because you have a reinforcement of that good feeling that you get and that increased focus. And dopamine then rewards your brain for having that feeling and for feeling good on the specific work that you've been focusing on. So you enjoy that feeling. So that is, I guess, a potential downside. But overall, that's the general effect. Nicotine has an increase in all three of these focus neurotransmitters, which is pretty awesome. And then going out kind of more specifically into each one. So nicotine does increase the amount of dopamine, and while it does increase your dopamine in your brain, it also stops the production of GABA, which GABA itself is kind of like a brake for dopamine. So the more GABA you have, the less dopamine is going to be released into your brain and throughout your body. And GABA is reduced. So you're going to have a gas pedal increase for dopamine and a destruction of the brake for dopamine. So just a huge flooding of positive increases in feelings and mood and motivation. Let's see. I think I already covered this, but yeah, adrenaline works by increasing your heart rate, your blood pressure, and increases the oxygen your cells get. So you have more of that fight or flight feeling. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's just kind of incredible. I didn't know this beforehand, but like learning that like one chemical compound can have all three of these effects and can really increase your focus significantly is very interesting. And I might start, trying forms of safe nicotine release. So it's like, chewing nicotine gum or nicotine patches, where it's just a pure form of that nicotine. There's no other forms of chemicals or carcinogenics involved in the release. And maybe I'll do a video after trying it and seeing for myself how that release is, and the focus benefits potentially. Maybe doing like little self-study on forms of doing puzzles and stuff like that. But a few more facts. So nicotine gets into the blood within 5 to 15 minutes and instantly increases the heart rate, makes you more alert and ready. And so that's obviously going to be the effects of the adrenaline. and nicotine effects can last from 1 to 2 hours. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about today was just a quick thing I learned about the brain itself. That's kind of aside from the nicotine topic. I think we've covered that enough, and it's kind of clear what nicotine does. So now looking at the brain and the 4 parts of the brain, this is a quick final topic. So our brain itself is split into 2 halves, at least the upper section that covers like our hypothalamus and all of the areas like the pituitary gland and these other things right below the brain. So the main parts of the brain are, you have the prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal lobe, which is responsible for more deeper thinking and movement and motor functions. So if we're splitting in half, each side has the same structure. It's a mirror. So this first part of the brain is the frontal lobe that controls your motor functions and more deeper thinking. Then you have this upper part of the brain, and that is responsible for sensory information, so like taste and touch. In the back of the brain, we'll have the occipital lobe, which is responsible for vision, and so how we see things, which kind of makes sense because as we probably all learned in school, when light or when our pictures enter into our eyeball, they come actually upside down, and then the image refracts within the eyeball. It refracts then on the back sides of our, no, that's not how it works. The image that we see is going to be like a triangle, which peaks right at the back of the retina, and then that image kind of continues to travel until it reaches the back of the head. So that's why it makes sense laterally or horizontally why the back of the brain controls the vision. And then finally, if we look at that diagram, the bottom part or the middle part of the brain focuses on our hearing, and that's called the temporal lobe. And yeah, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this was a really long one, so I don't think anyone is ever going to make it this far, but if you did, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.